Have you ever had a moment where it felt like the world had pushed you to the very edge of a cliff? Below you, a bottomless abyss. Behind you, a dead end with no retreat. The only card you have left to play is a dream that even you aren't sure is worth believing in. December 1993, Edinburgh. It was a winter exactly like that. The woman in this picture is 28-year-old Joanne Rowling. She had just escaped a catastrophic marriage, fleeing from the warmth of Portugal back to the biting cold of Scotland like a deserter from a lost war. She was jobless, penniless, and clutching a baby daughter in her arms. Her entire worldly possessions fit into a single, battered suitcase. Inside that suitcase, aside from a few old clothes, her daughter's formula, and a divorce decree that screamed of a dead marriage, there were several stacks of typed pages, the first 3 chapters of a story about a young, dark-haired wizard with glasses. In that desperate winter, no one could have imagined that this woman, surviving on a 69 pounds a week government handout, would one day be richer than the Queen of England. And absolutely no one could have predicted that these few pieces of paper would become the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar magical empire that would captivate generations of people across the entire globe. This is a story we've all heard, a perfect modern-day fairy tale. But today, I don't want to tell you another fairy tale, because fairy tales can be deceiving. They can trick us into thinking that success is a form of magic, a blessing bestowed by fate. Over the past few months, I've scoured nearly every interview, biography, and documentary about J.K. Rowling, and I've discovered that there are 3 profound misunderstandings about her success. Today, we're going to peel back the layers of this story like an onion to confront the overlooked pain and the misinterpreted choices. We will re-examine everything through the lens of economist Nassim Taleb's Black Swan theory. You will find that this is not just one person's incredible comeback story. It's a practical guide on how to capture the one positive black swan in your own life that can change everything. Welcome to Fanko Decodes, where we extract the wisdom from the world's most legendary figures. Are you ready to embark on this journey of growth with me? Let's go back to the time before the magic began, to that decisive moment when nothing had yet happened. Chapter 1. The Spark of Genesis, the Shadow of Grief, Genius Forged in Trauma. Our story begins on a crowded train, delayed for 4 long hours. The year is 1990, on a journey from Manchester to London. The air in the carriage was a thick cocktail of sandwiches, sweat, and cheap perfume. A 25-year-old Joanne Rowling was squeezed into a window seat. She had just spent a week house hunting in Manchester, trying to move closer to her boyfriend at the time. The train lurched forward and then stopped, again and again. The fields outside, baking in the late summer sun, were a monotonous blur. She was irritable, exhausted, her mind in a state of blank suspension. And right there, in that liminal space between boredom and frustration, an idea, no, not an idea, a person, struck her with the force of a lightning bolt. A boy walked into her head. He was scrawny, with messy black hair and round glasses held together with tape. He didn't know he was a wizard, but he was about to be accepted into a school of magic. This boy, Harry Potter, just sprang to life, fully formed, complete with his history and his destiny, appearing vividly in her consciousness. And then, as if a floodgate had been thrown open, they all came rushing in. Hermione Granger, the brilliant, confident, slightly bossy girl. Ron Weasley, the loyal, kind, red-headed boy from a large, poor family. Even the noseless, unmentionable Lord Voldemort. They appeared in her mind's eye like a procession of long-lost friends. The towers of Hogwarts Castle, the moving staircases, the Sorting Hat song, an entire world unfolded before her. Rowling's eyes flew open, the reflection of a magnificent castle seemingly glinting in her pupils. She was trembling with excitement, instinctively rummaging through her bag. Makeup, keys, wallet. She nearly emptied the entire thing, but couldn't find a single working pen. She glanced at the man next to her, reading a newspaper. The words, "Can I borrow a pen?" formed on her lips, but her chronic shyness won, and she swallowed them back down. For those agonizing 4 hours of delay, all she could do was close her eyes and trace the details of this world in her mind over and over again, terrified she would forget a single detail. She was like a devout believer guarding a divine revelation. That night, back in her apartment in Clapham, London, she immediately scribbled down every name and idea she could remember and began a writing process that would stretch intermittently over the next 5 years. However, fate is both perfectly fair and brutally cruel. It gives you the most explosive bolt of inspiration, and then often it delivers the most devastating blow. Just 6 months later, on December 30th, 1990, a phone call shattered Rowling's world. Her 45-year-old mother, Anne, after a 10-year battle with the terrifying disease multiple sclerosis, was gone. Rowling had watched the disease imprison her mother, transforming her from a healthy, vibrant woman into someone confined to a wheelchair. In a later interview, her voice cracked with emotion. "I started writing Harry Potter 6 months before my mother died. I never got the chance to tell her about it. If she had known, I don't know, but it's just an incredibly painful thing for me." Her mother's death was a giant black hole that swallowed all her joy. But this bottomless grief was also channeled, in a way she never expected, into the magical world that was just beginning to bud. It was like a drop of ink in clear water, instantly staining the entire story's canvas. Originally, Harry was just an orphan with vague memories of his parents. But after her mother's passing, Rowling rewrote the beginning. Harry's longing for his parents, his confusion about death, that soul-deep sense of loss. It was an almost direct echo of Rowling's own heartbroken cry. This is why, from the very first book, Harry Potter tackles an incredibly profound theme: death. Remember the Mirror of Erised? When Harry stands before it for the first time and sees his parents, whom he never knew, standing right behind him, smiling and waving. In that moment, he is lost. Night after night, he risks being caught by Filch just to sneak back to that empty room, just to get one more glimpse of the illusion in the mirror. This mirror shows us neither knowledge nor truth. Men have wasted away before it, entranced by what they have seen, or been driven mad. That mirror was Rowling's echoing letter to her own lost mother. She transformed her deepest trauma into the story's most powerful emotional core. And here, we must debunk the first widespread myth, the genius theory. We tend to believe that great works are born from talent and inspiration. But Rowling's experience reveals a harsher truth. Great works are often born from trauma, not from a greenhouse. It's the wounds that never heal that give a story the power to pierce the human heart, transcending age and culture. Chapter 2, The Fall into the Abyss, Welfare as a Final, Flimsy Shield. Her mother's death left Rowling feeling suffocated. To escape the grief, she made an impulsive decision to flee the country. She saw an ad for an English teaching job in Porto, Portugal, applied immediately, packed her bags, and took the fledgling manuscript with her to that sunny, distant land. There, she met a Portuguese journalist. They fell in love and married in a whirlwind romance. She thought she had found a new beginning. However, the marriage quickly devolved into a nightmare. In 1993, her daughter, Jessica, was born. Just a few months later, late one night after a violent argument, her husband dragged her out of the house and threw her onto the street. At 5 a.m, she stood on the cold pavement, clutching her infant daughter. She had only one thought: escape with my daughter and that manuscript. A few days later, she boarded a plane back to the UK, a defeated figure. Her only destination was Edinburgh, Scotland, where her sister Diane lived. She thought it would be a temporary refuge. She never imagined it would become the site of her personal hell. She had no money, no job, and her friends were far away. She went from being an employed, independent woman to a failure who had to rely on her sister's charity. Worse, a darkness began to envelop her, a tide of crushing emotion. She was diagnosed with severe clinical depression. As Rowling herself described it, depression isn't sadness. Sadness is about something. Depression is this cold, hollow feeling of nothingness. I seriously considered suicide. The only thing that stopped me was my daughter. She's what kept me going. And here, we must topple the second myth, the welfare state success story. Many people claim Rowling's success is a testament to the UK's robust welfare system, which allowed her to write in peace. This is a beautiful but false narrative. The reality is that in 1993, Britain was under a conservative government that had drastically cut public spending. The social narrative was hostile towards welfare dependents, especially single mothers. When she went to apply for benefits, she felt the suspicious, judgmental gaze of the staff. In the end, she was granted £69 per week. After paying rent, this left a pittance to support herself and her baby. She lived in a mice-infested flat with no central heating and damp walls. In winter, she would move her daughter's cot into the corner of the living room, the only room with a single electric heater, while she slept on the sofa, wrapped in every blanket she could find. Poverty isn't just a lack of material things, it's the crushing of one's dignity. She would often wake up in the middle of the night, racked with hunger, but she wouldn't dare open the fridge. The little bit of milk and bread inside was for her daughter's breakfast. She felt like a complete and utter failure, a failed daughter, a failed wife, a failed professional, and worst of all, a failed mother who couldn't even properly feed her own child. And yet, it was upon this desolate wasteland of failure that she made a decision that, to any rational person, would seem outrageously indulgent, even insane. She was going to finish the story of Harry Potter. Writing became her only form of therapy against the depression. When the real world was a landscape of gray, she could escape into a world bursting with color and magic. Hogwarts was her sanctuary. Chapter 3. The Coffee Shop Gamble, Doing the Right Thing in the Wrong Place. In the Edinburgh winter, her flat was as cold as an icebox. You could see your breath in the air. Rowling found that when her fingers were stiff with cold, she couldn't type. To save the tiny amount of money it would cost for heating, and to find a space where she could focus, she devised a plan. Every afternoon she would wait for her daughter, Jessica, to fall asleep. Then she would carefully place her in the pram, cover her with thick blankets, and push her out the door. Her destination was a cafe co-owned by her brother-in-law, Nicholson's Cafe. She would order the cheapest single espresso, ask for a free cup of hot water, and mix them to make a large Americano that she could nurse for the entire afternoon. Then, at a small, wobbly round table, she would spread out her papers and set up her old manual typewriter. Her only timer was her daughter's sleep cycle. She had to write against the clock, furiously, every single second. It was in these fragmented sessions, constantly interrupted by the cries of a baby, that the world of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry slowly took shape. The shops of Diagon Alley, the songs of the Sorting Hat, the moving staircases, the rules of Quidditch. With a single pen on scraps of paper salvaged from the bin or in the cheapest notebooks she could find, she built a magical world that was infinitely warmer than her own reality. And here we see the first flicker of the Black Swan theory. Economist Nassim Taleb states that a key characteristic of a Black Swan event is that it appears where it's not supposed to be. Think about it. Where should a world-changing literary masterpiece be born? In a quiet scholar's study? In the polished workshop of an established author? By no conventional measure should it have been born in a noisy cafe, written on napkins and cheap notebooks by a single mother during her baby's naps. This is the first law of innovation, intersection and fusion. What Rowling was doing was a stunning act of cross-pollination. First, the fusion of the magical and the mundane. Traditional fantasy novels like The Lord of the Rings create entirely separate worlds. But Rowling placed Hogwarts right inside our familiar contemporary world. It has house rivalries, final exams, and sports tournaments, just like a real British boarding school. This magic school next door feeling was unprecedentedly relatable. Second, the fusion of classical literature and popular fiction. Rowling majored in classics and French. She brought this academic rigor to children's literature. Many of the spells are derived from Latin. The plot structures borrow a complexity reminiscent of Shakespearean tragedy. She wrapped a core of serious literature in the accessible shell of a popular novel. And third, the fusion of serious themes with adventure. On the surface, it's a magical adventure, but underneath it explores timeless themes of love, death, prejudice, courage, and choice. It's like a literary Trojan horse. It uses a brilliant story to get you to open the gates, and only then does it release its payload of heavy, thought-provoking ideas. Let's return to the story. In 1995, after countless afternoons in that cafe, Rowling typed the final word of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. She gathered the thick stack of pages into a folder, looking at the manuscript that held 5 years of her life, all her hopes and all her pain. She knew this was likely her last and only gamble. Chapter 4, 12 Punches and a Glimmer of Hope, The Market Will Lie. With the manuscript in hand, the next challenge was getting it published. Rowling knew nothing about the publishing industry. She went to the library and, in a thick copy of the Writer's Artist's Yearbook, found a list of literary agents. She didn't have the money to photocopy the entire manuscript multiple times. Even buying stamps was a calculated expense. She carefully selected a few agencies and mailed out the first 3 chapters, which she had retyped twice on her old typewriter. The first reply came quickly, from a large, well-known agency. It was a beautifully printed, standard rejection letter. They had even misspelled her name. The paper felt weightless, but it landed on her heart like a stone. Her only remaining hope was the second agency, a small firm called Christopher Little Literary Agents. Weeks went by with no word. She had almost resigned herself to the idea that this story was nothing more than her own private fantasy. Just as she was about to give up, a thick envelope appeared in her mailbox. It was from the little agency. Her heart leaped into her throat. She carefully tore it open. Inside, along with her returned manuscript pages, was a short letter. It read, "Dear Ms. Rowling, thank you for your submission. We would be pleased to represent your work. Please get in touch at your earliest convenience." She thought she had finally seen the light. But what followed was a year of even more brutal despair. Her agent, Christopher Little, a man who truly believed in the story's potential, sent the manuscript to 12 of the UK's major publishing houses, and what they received in return was a relentless stream of rejections. "It's too long. Kids today don't have the patience to read a book this thick." That was the verdict from Penguin. "The pacing is too slow. The beginning doesn't grab you. The market for children's fantasy is saturated. This won't sell. We don't believe a book set in a boarding school has any commercial potential." Every rejection letter was like a punch to the gut, battering her already fragile confidence. The heaviest blow came from Macmillan Publishers. An editor had shown great interest, even inviting Rowling for a meeting, which gave her immense hope. She was ecstatic for days, imagining the moment she would sign a contract. But in the end, they too said no. Walking through the streets of Edinburgh that afternoon after leaving the Macmillan office, Rowling felt like her world had caved in. She truly wanted to give up. Maybe she should just focus on being a French teacher, provide a stable life for her daughter, and stop chasing this impossible dream of being a writer. This illustrates the second law of innovation. Value is created in misfit. All the publishers tried to cram Harry Potter into the pre-existing box labeled children's books. And when judged by the standards of that box, of course it didn't fit. What they failed to realize was that the book's true value lay precisely in its misfit status. It was a children's book with the literary complexity of an adult novel. It didn't belong to any known category, which meant it had the potential to create an entirely new one. With everyone telling her no, in 1996, her agent sent the manuscript to a 13th publisher, Bloomsbury. This was their last hope. Chapter 5, The 8-Year-Old's Verdict, The Arrival of Randomness. The manuscript landed on the desk of Barry Cunningham, an editor in Bloomsbury's children's department. After reading it, he, like the 12 editors before him, was full of doubt. The story was captivating, but it was too long, too complex, and unlike anything else on the market for children. He couldn't make a decision. So he made a move that was entirely random and would end up changing publishing history. He didn't send it to the marketing department for an analysis. Instead, he took the first chapter home and gave it to his 8-year-old daughter, Alice. A little while later, she came running back to him. "Dad, where's the rest of it? I need the rest of it. Does Harry get to Hogwarts? What happens next? This is amazing." The direct, unfiltered reaction of an 8-year-old child was more valuable than all the market analysis from seasoned editors. Cunningham instantly realized he might be holding something truly special. Bloomsbury decided to sign the book. They offered Rowling an advance of £1,500. When she got the call, she could hardly believe her ears. To her at that time, £1,500 was a fortune. It was life-saving money. But Cunningham also gave her a piece of advice. "Joanne, we think you should use an initial for your first name. We're concerned that if boys know the author is a woman, they might not want to read a book written by a woman." This seems absurd today, but it was a common prejudice at the time. Desperate for the book to sell, Rowling agreed. She didn't have a middle name, so she borrowed her grandmother's, Kathleen, and thus the name J.K. Rowling was born. On June 26, 1997, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was officially published. The initial print run was a paltry 1,000 copies, 500 of which went directly to libraries. No one had high expectations. This entire process perfectly illustrates another characteristic of the Black Swan: extreme, unpredictable randomness. Rowling's success didn't depend on how hard she worked, nor on the professional judgment of 12 major publishers. It hinged on the random impulse of one editor and the genuine excitement of his 8-year-old daughter. This teaches us the third law of innovation: increase your exposure to positive black swans. You can't predict which attempt will succeed. The only thing you can do is, like Rowling, after being rejected 12 times, to keep going and knock on that 13th door. The more doors you knock on, the higher your chances of stumbling upon your own 8-year-old Alice. The essence of persistence isn't about fighting the world. It's about giving yourself enough chances to be struck by random, life-altering luck. Chapter 6, The Final Experiment, When the Magic Fades. The rest of the story we all know. From obscurity to global phenomenon, from a 1,000-copy print run to over 600 million in sales, Rowling became a billionaire. In 1998, when Scholastic in the U.S. bought the American rights for a staggering $105,000, she got the call from her agent and was so stunned she froze in the middle of a cafe. She could finally quit her teaching job and become a full-time writer. The very first thing she did was move out of that nightmare-inducing apartment. But the story doesn't end there. Now, I want to share the most brilliant and brutal conclusion, one that shatters the third and most deeply ingrained myth about success: cream always rises to the top. In 2013, years after the Harry Potter series had concluded, a crime novel titled The Cuckoo's Calling was quietly published. The author was a debut novelist named Robert Galbraith, a former Royal Military Police officer. The book received decent reviews, with critics praising its mature prose and solid plot. But its sales were dismal. Over a period of 3 months, it sold fewer than 1,500 copies. Then, a reporter at the Sunday Times, using linguistic analysis software, noticed that the book's writing style was remarkably similar to J.K. Rowling's. When pressed, Rowling admitted that Robert Galbraith was her pseudonym. The moment the news broke, the world exploded. The book's sales skyrocketed by over 400,000% in a matter of hours, shooting to the top of bestseller lists worldwide. Overnight, a book nobody knew about became a global sensation. The same book, the same content, the same author. Just by adding the name J.K. Rowling, its fate was completely transformed. This social experiment, orchestrated by Rowling herself, was a resounding slap in the face to anyone who believes in the talent will out theory. It proved with irrefutable evidence that in the real world, talent is far from the only ingredient for success. Timing, luck, branding, identity, these seemingly intangible factors can carry a weight far greater than we can ever imagine. If Bloomsbury had also rejected her all those years ago, it's highly probable that Harry Potter would have suffered the same initial fate as the Cuckoo's Calling, buried forever in a slush pile, becoming an unknown footnote in literary history. So now, let's go back to the beginning. What does the story of J.K. Rowling truly teach us? It teaches us that adversity is not an endpoint. It is the fertile ground for innovation. Your deepest traumas can be the source of your most unique strengths. Don't be afraid of what makes you different. That is precisely your most valuable asset. It teaches us that true innovation often comes from intersection and misfit. Apply your expertise to an unrelated field. Place yourself in a context where you don't belong. When everyone else thinks you're strange, you might just be standing on the verge of the next big thing. And most importantly, it teaches us to believe in our own story, even when the entire world says it's out of touch. But at the same time, we must have a profound respect for the world's randomness. You cannot engineer success, but you can, by constantly trying, by relentlessly knocking on that 13th door, infinitely increase your probability of being hit by a positive black swan. Rowling's magic wasn't in waving a wand. It was in that moment when she had nothing, when she was cast aside by the world, and yet, in the corner of a cafe, she whispered yes to her story into her own life. That pen could be your keyboard, your paintbrush, your code editor, or that crazy startup idea that no one else believes in. We do not need magic to change the world. We carry all the power we need inside ourselves already. Now it's your turn. Go create your own beautiful, impossible black swan. Thank you for watching Fanko Decodes. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement is the fuel that keeps this channel going. I'll see you in the next one.